Oh, hello everybody. I'm Luca. Today I'm gonna talk about dependency injection and how to implement it in an application that is already built and it's already working. Can I ask you, how many of you knows what is dependency injection? Just raise your hand. Okay, so keep your hands up, please. And keep your hands up if you know how to apply it. Okay. And keep your hands up if you ever applied it, not in iOS app, in every kind of, okay. That's good. Good, so shouldn't be difficult. So let's see if you said the truth. Let's do a small test. So how many of you thinks that this line is correct? Like where the dependency injection pattern is applied well here. Raise your hands if you think that it's good. So no one thinks it's good. Okay, that's good. So because the answer is no, of course. I'll let you know why later and how to improve it. What about this function? Do you think here the dependency injection pattern is well applied? Raise your hand if you think yes or I don't know. Do you think it's not well applied? Raise your hand if it's not. So I don't see any hands, so that's okay. Okay, so in this example, it's, if it goes, no, it's well applied, actually. No, yeah, it's other answer. What about this? It's a bit longer. What about this snippet? Do you think it's good enough for dependency injection or not? Okay, I'll say the answer, and it's not. So before going to explain why the previous snippets were wrong or correct and how to improve them, I want to go over the dependency injection definition. So the dependency injection from Wikipedia is a design principle, a design pattern that that allows you to create objects and pass all the information that the object needs to perform whatever action. So the object that you are creating does not like take the object that it needs or reference that it needs from somewhere else, but they are passed by the object that created it. So if we look more in depth to the dependency injection, our object becomes a module. Yeah, what is a module actually? A module is something that you can reuse everywhere, out of the same context or even out of the same application. So you can reuse the component that you created outside of the application where you created, because it's easy to reuse it, because you have only to inject the dependencies that he has to have. And so as I said, the object has to be created with a dependency passed by the object that created it. So let's go back to the tests and let's see what was wrong before. So in this line, actually there is something wrong. There is the usage of the singleton, actually. So dependency injection means no singletons at all. And here the problem is that the object that is using this line doesn't know how the request is performed and what library is used. For example, if you want to use the object that uses this line in a tvOS application and your library that you're using for networking is not available for tvOS, you cannot use the object. So that's the problem. The other problem is that how can you test particular responses? So you can ask your backend developer, hey, can you give me a different response? Can you send me 500 status code or whatever? But in case you have a continuous integration system, that wouldn't work. So the other snippet wrong was this one. And what was wrong actually is this part. So the view controller is creating the view model instance itself. And that's not correct for dependency injection because it has to be passed by the one that creates the view controller. And that's because when you use this view controller, you cannot inject any kind of view model. You have this view model, and you cannot pass any other dependency like the API service that you're using. So let's go to the demo. Make it big. Is this fine or bigger? Bigger? Is this okay? So as I said, I built this really easy application that's working. Too big. And it does a request to the server and shows a list of events. That's super easy. So it works fine. But here it's already opened on the API communicator class. And as you can see, it uses a singleton. And that's, as I said before, it's wrong for dependency injection. So let's remove it. And let's go in the constant file that I think almost everyone uses. And let's remove this default here. And let's use a normal instance. And for making the dependency injection work better, we should use always protocols in Swift. Because in this way, we can inject any type of class that conforms to that protocol. In this way, you can inject every kind of class, depending if you are testing the app or not, or if you are in development or environment or production environment. So I created here the API service protocol here, and as you can see, it has the same function, the same interface as the API communicator. So I can just define API communicator as API service confirming, and it should still work. So what's the next step? I go inside the view model that I have, and here I'm still calling API communicator default instance. I can reuse the API communicator instance in the constants, but doing this doesn't change anything, actually. So what I will do is I will define a constant called API service, that it's API service conformant. And I will create the init method that takes this API service parameter and initialize the object. And here I will use the API service property instead of the API communicator. So it doesn't change anything. It still work. But the problem here now is in the view controller because we are initializing the view model in this way. So for preventing any problem and for making the talk shorter, I will just define the view model properties as a variable that has to be type of view model and unwrapped optional. In this way, you don't have to override the init with coder or init with name and pass the view model inside. But yeah, you can say it will crash, but that's fine because we're calling it in the view did load, and if it crashes, we will notice it as long as we run the app. So we will notice it immediately. So who is gonna pass the view model instance to this view controller? In this example, it's pretty ugly, but it's done in the app delegate. Here, I'm instantiating the controller, passing into a navigation controller. So let's instantiate the view model. It's a view model class that has as API service the API communicator that we defined in the constant. In this piece in this line, you can replace the API communicator depending on the environment or depending what you want to do. So you can, I don't know, call a factory that decides whether use API communicator or something else. Then we pass the view model instance to the view controller, and this should still work, actually. So it builds, let's run it. And it works, that's great. So we didn't change anything, actually. We just applied the dependency injection pattern. But what I said before is that we should use dependency injection for testing. Because if we want to test specific API responses using the normal API communicator or API service, we should ask to the backend developer to send something different, or I don't know, sniffing the response or whatever. So I'll explain you how to test it. So right here, I created a mock service class. It's a simple one that conforms to API service protocol, and it implements the function that requires the protocol, and it has this variable JSON. It's really simple. I don't use these objects in my apps. I have something more hard to explain, so it's just for the scope of the talk. And here we have our test. So we want to test if the correct response is handled well, and if it's an invalid JSON, if it's handled well. So what should happen? Let's go back to the view model. What should happen when the response is fine? We have here our events variable, and in case the response goes well, is good, we parse the JSON and we fill the event array with this array of events got from the backend. Otherwise, if there is an error during the JSON parsing, we set the array as empty. And there is an error here. I don't know if you notice it, but actually it's here. It's more for as a consistency, not really an error, because here in case of error, we set the event array as empty, but in case of error here, we don't set anything. So the array will stay the same as before, or stay like empty. So how to test this? Let's do the correct response. I have here the test already done, and it's really simple. I have here the mock service instance and a fake event. That's not useful, the fake event, I think. Yeah, I'm not using it. So I'm creating the mock service, and I'm setting the JSON value as event JSON. That it's a fake JSON that contains the events keyword and only one event inside. So it should be correct. I'm instantiating the view model because in this way I don't have to test the view controller. It doesn't need to be tested. The logic is on the view model. So I listen the events change, and I check if the event count is greater than 0. So it should be fine because the JSON contains one event. Otherwise, if the count is not greater than 0, it means that something was wrong. Then I call the get event method, and I wait for the expectation for 2 seconds. And let's run it. This succeeded. And this too, but it's commented. So now I want to test what happens in case of invalid JSON. Oh, here there is type. Okay, so I send an empty JSON that should be invalid actually, because I'm sending here this empty JSON. That's so. Since there's nothing in this JSON, we should go inside this guardlet, the else of the guardlet statement. So let's see if it fails or not. This one should fail. It's testing. Okay, this failed because the events changed didn't get called actually. Because the return didn't set the event array, and so the did set is not called, and the event change is not called. So if we set here the self.events equal to empty array, and run again the test, this should work. And succeeded. Yep. So this was helpful to find this error. I already knew that there was an error, but without testing, we probably couldn't find it in less time. And yeah, that's why the dependency injection is useful for testing actually, and testing is useful for getting some time during development. So another thing that I would like to say is that you remember the correct snippet, the set event method. It's here in the event table view cell. Actually, we can improve it because here the set event accept an event object. And if you want to, for example, display, let's open. If you want to display another object in 2 lines like this, you have to duplicate the cell somehow and pass the other object. So without renaming the cell, because it would take much time, we can create a protocol also here that could be called 2 lines designable. That has 2 variables, like first line, it's a string, and the second line, that it's a string too. In this way, we can accept here an item that is 2 lines designable. And we can first line, second line, and then we can remove this one that we didn't use at all. So for now, it shouldn't build because the event object doesn't conform to that protocol. But if we make it conforming to that protocol, writing an extension, first line, we just return the name, and the second line, we return the description. In this way, should work. And if you rename the table view cell in something like 2-line table view cell, you can reuse the cell for everything, like for an event or for, I don't know, a to-do or something else. You can take this table view cell and bring it outside from the project and use it anywhere else. That has to be iOS app, because otherwise it doesn't work. So I think that's it for me. Oh, yeah, summary. So I said that testing the app is really useful because as you saw, we found that error without any problem and without testing the app for hours and hours and hours manually or with testers. We found that problem immediately, and using dependency injection, we could create the code that it's easy to test. And that's one point of dependency injection. The other point is that that makes the code really reusable. As you could see in the event table view cell, we can take the cell and put it everywhere in the project and everywhere in other projects, and we can still display two lines, one bold and one not. So yeah, that's it. Any questions? Yeah. Oh, good. Sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Some advantage or disadvantage, or what would you recommend?
Actually, wait. Yeah, you can use generic. Yeah.
Okay, I was asking that in the past when I did testing using dependency injection, I was also using generic types like protocols or interfaces, but I had, let's say, a small problem that I had then tons of protocols. So instead of using these generic types, I started using mocking frameworks. So the code was not really generic, but it was a bit more straightforward. So I wanted to ask if you've considered this, or if there is some disadvantage or advantage, let's say, using generic types over mocking frameworks.
I haven't used the mocking frameworks at all. I always do them manually, and I always use generics everywhere. Like my hubs are all generic, and I can reuse almost every component, and I like it. And except that it takes a while to compile, it's much more easy and readable and reusable. I don't know what you exactly mean with that you ended up using mocking framework because there were so many generics. Because I think that generics help you.
Yes, let's say for the public interface, it's always better to have generics, but for the internal implementation, if you have a lot of code, you need to write a lot of tests, then having for everything, protocol interface, it's a lot of work, and really when I use some mocking framework, maybe in Android Mockito, Power Mock, in iOS OC Mock, so let's say things are done pretty fast, and I did not find, let's say, any problems with it. So I just wanted to know if you have some experience like with this.
No, I don't have any experience. I had some experience in Objective-C with OCMOC, but then when I started developing in Swift, OCMOC wasn't available yet, so I didn't even start to use it. I don't know if it's available for Swift right now, but I've never used any frameworks for mocking anything else because, as I said, using protocols is pretty easy. And you can use libraries for dependency injection, like SWinject, that helps you much more for managing your dependencies. So I don't know. I don't know if I answered to your question somehow.
Yeah, like if you have no experience, I just wondered if you can compare it.
Actually, I can't say anything because I have no experience with mocking frameworks.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry. Anyone else? The guy there.
If somebody is new to the code, if I don't know, a colleague is not familiar with the code, I think it's it's a disadvantage for him because yes, these protocols are nice, and I definitely I am pro, or I'm using these or this strategy, but I have found that this should be told that whoever is new to the code, he should also proper documentation is part of the success of this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's not straightforward as other way to do that, but actually Maybe because I'm used to use protocols and I don't find any difficulty in using them. But I just imagine them as small containers. So if I say that event is kind of like here, it's conforming to JSON desirable, it's realizable, I go there and I see that it has to implement init with JSON and controls, and I know that that class will implement it init. I don't know where, it might be hard when it goes into generics, when you have to, for example, write some generic function that takes a protocol conforming object where some other associated type is conforming to another protocol. Yeah, that could be really hard, but I don't see anything really difficult here. But if you have any questions regarding the code, feel free to ask.
And sorry, I mean, besides this, are you using this for branding, for example, runtime branding? If there is a, I don't know, you can have application, you can have two different targets, or it's sort of a compile time generics approach. But when you are already in runtime, and this is the case, you can also use it for branding. Do you use this approach?
What do you mean with branding?
For example, you could have in-house application, but which is targeting to different audience.
Oh, okay.
And one group of users, I don't know, are administrators, and another group of users are just front uživatel, or these kind of users. And if you see this approach, if it is correct.
Well, I've never done something like this, but I think that you can like take away the part that has to be reused between these two applications, like the front end and the admin applications. For example, the API request and I don't know, like managing of the user and other things like that. You can take them out from the app and build some sort of private library and include it in your projects without any difficulty, because they are like, you have to inject everything. So, and they should be foundation type. So you don't have you shouldn't have any problem when importing the library in these two different projects. And regarding the other question, you were saying different targets. Actually, I have only one target in the app. One target for archiving, one target for testing. Well, there is a test target, of course. One target for developing. It's always the same except the testing one. So I don't see this problem, actually.
Well, but if you want, you can definitely use dependency injection with branding, because I've done these kinds of apps, and it is even more important if you're trying to brand or change your parts of the code in runtime, that you have like independent pieces or ways how to load different resources. So dependency injection is a huge helper here, because if you have like independent modules that you can switch, then you can construct your dependency injection container in a completely different way. For example, if you have some defines in separate targets, then your DI container could look completely different for each target. So I think this is a really like viable approach for branding.
Okay. Anyone else? Please.